Together? The mud splashed up to Corbin's knees as his stallion thunder pounded through the storm-soaked main street of Willow Creek. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the desperate determination carved into his weathered face. The courthouse. Steps loomed ahead, crowded with men clutching their life savings, all waiting for the same auction that would decide Magnolia Fairweather's fate. $50. Someone shouted from inside as Corbin burst through the heavy oak doors, his spurs jangling against the wooden floor. Water streamed from his leather coat, pooling at his boots as he pushed through the crowd of bidders surrounding the auction block. There she stood proud, defiant, with fire in her emerald eyes, despite the humiliating circumstances. Magnolia's auburn hair cascaded over her shoulders, her calico dress torn at the hem. From her struggle against the sheriff's men who dragged her from her father's debt-ridden farm. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man named Bartholomew Grimes, held his gavel high while surveying the eager faces below. "Do I hear 60? Grimes called out, his voice echoing off the courthouse walls. Corbin's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd ridden 30 miles through the worst storm in a decade, his horse nearly collapsing twice, all because old Pete at the saloon had mentioned the Fairweather girl was being sold to pay her father's gambling debts. The same Magnolia who'd nursed wounded animals behind the schoolhouse, who'd shared her lunch with him when they were children, who'd grown into the most beautiful woman in 3 counties. 65, called out Rufus Blackthorne, the railroad baron's son, his gold teeth glinting as he smiled smugly. Make it 75. Magnolia's eyes swept the crowd desperately until they landed on Corbin. For a moment, time stopped. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something that looked like hope. Her lips parted slightly, and though no sound emerged, he could read the single word they formed: "Please, $80. Corbin's voice boomed across the courthouse, silencing the murmurs. Every head turned toward the dripping stranger whose voice carried the weight of absolute determination. Rufus whirled around, his face flushing red. "Who the hell, $100? Corbin interrupted, his steel-gray eyes never leaving Magnolia's face. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with the gold coins he'd saved for 5 years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. Cash money. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. $100 was more than most men in Willow Creek made in a year. Grimes's eyes widened with greed as he leaned forward on his podium.
"Yeah, 100 going, what's..."
The auctioneer called, scanning the room for higher bids. Rufus sputtered, his face turning purple. 120. Without hesitation, Corbin opened the pouch wider, revealing more gold than anyone in the room had ever seen. $200, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. Final offer. The courthouse fell dead quiet, except for the drumming of rain on the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. Magnolia's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the man who just risked everything for her freedom. Grimes raised his gavel with trembling hands, his voice cracking with excitement. $200 going once, ... going twice, ... The gavel hung suspended in the air like a sword of Damocles, and in that frozen moment, Magnolia's entire world balanced on the precipice of change. She could see Corbin's chest rising and falling with each labored breath, his clothes still dripping from the storm that had nearly claimed him on his desperate ride to save her. "It's going twice?" Grimes repeated, his beady eyes scanning the stunned crowd one final time. Rufus Blackthorne fumbled frantically through his pockets, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Wait, I need a moment too late, boy," growled Sheriff Morrison from the back of the room. "Rules are rules. You bid or you don't." Magnolia's heart thundered as she watched Corbin step closer to the auction block, his weathered hand still clutching the leather pouch. She remembered him as the quiet boy who'd carved her name into the old oak tree behind the schoolhouse, who'd left wildflowers on her windowsill every Sunday after church. But this man standing before her now was different, harder, stronger, shaped by years of dangerous work on the cattle trails. Sold. The gavel cracked against the wooden block like a gunshot, and the sound reverberated through Magnolia's very soul. Without thinking, without caring about the shocked gasps from the crowd or the social conventions that demanded she remain passive and grateful. Magnolia leaped down from the auction block. Her bare feet hit the wooden floor running, and she launched herself into Corbin's arms with such force that he staggered backward, his strong hands catching her waist to steady them both. Their lips crashed together in a kiss that silenced every whisper, every judgment, every cruel laugh in the courthouse. It was a kiss born of desperation and gratitude, of childhood memories and newfound hope, of a love that had smoldered for years beneath the surface of small-town propriety. Thunder rolled overhead as if the very heavens were applauding their reunion. Magnolia, Corbin whispered against her lips, his voice rough with emotion. I thought I'd lost you forever. You saved me, she breathed, her fingers tangling in his rain-dampened hair. You actually saved me. The crowd erupted in scandalized chatter, but neither of them cared. Rufus Blackthorne pushed through the throng, his face twisted with fury. This isn't over, Drifter. That girl was meant to be mine, and I don't take kindly to being shown up by some saddle tramp. Corbin's arm tightened protectively around Magnolia's waist as he turned to face Blackthorne, his eyes cold as winter steel. The lady made her choice clear enough. I suggest you respect it, lady, Rufus spat. She's property now, bought and paid for. Your property. The words hit Magnolia like a physical blow, reminding her of the harsh reality of her situation. Despite Corbin's heroic gesture, despite the kiss that had set her heart ablaze, she was still legally bound to him now, purchased like livestock at market. The joy drained from her face as the full weight of her circumstances crashed down upon her. Corbin saw the change in her expression immediately. He cupped her face gently in his calloused hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. Listen to me, Magnolia Fairweather. I may have paid that money, but you're not my property. You're not anyone's property. You're free to walk out that door right now if that's what you want. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt. Now hold on there, cowboy. Legal's legal. Money changed hands, and I'll tear up the papers, Corbin said, firmly, never taking his eyes off Magnolia's face. Your choice, Magnolia. Always your choice. The courthouse had grown suffocating with the weight of 100 staring eyes and whispered judgments. Magnolia felt the walls closing in around her, the reality of her situation crystallizing like frost on a window pane. Free or not, she had nowhere to go. Her father's farm was lost to gambling debts. Her mother dead these past 3 years. And her only living relative was an aunt in San Francisco, who'd made it clear that fallen women weren't welcome in her pristine household. I need air, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crowd's murmuring. Corbin nodded immediately, understanding written across his rugged features. He shrugged off his wet coat and draped it around her shoulders before guiding her toward the courthouse doors. The leather smelled of rain and horses and something indefinably masculine that made her feel safer than she had in months. The storm had passed while they were inside, leaving the air crisp and clean. Puddles reflected the emerging stars as they stepped onto the courthouse porch, away from the prying eyes and wagging tongues. Magnolia pulled the coat tighter around herself, acutely aware of how her torn dress must look, how her hair hung loose and wild around her shoulders. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly, staring out at the muddy street where a few horses stood tied to hitching posts. Spend your life savings on someone like me, someone like you. Right? Corbin turned to face her fully, his eyes searching her face in the moonlight. Magnolia, you're the kindest, strongest woman I've ever known. What your father did, his debts, that's not on you. She laughed bitterly, the sound catching in her throat. The whole town thinks I'm ruined goods. My father gambled away everything we had, including his daughter's honor, apparently. No decent man would want. I want you, Corbin interrupted, his voice rough with sincerity. I've wanted you since we were 15 years old, and you helped me patch up that injured hawk behind the church. I've carried your memory with me on every cattle drive, through every storm, every lonely night under the stars. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she shook her head. You don't understand. I can't give you what a wife should give. I don't have a dowry. I don't care about any of that. He stepped closer, his hands hovering near her face but not quite touching, as if she were something precious that might break. I care about you, just you. The courthouse doors banged open behind them, and Rufus Blackthorne emerged with two of his father's hired men flanking him. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed despite the humid air. His blonde hair slicked back with pomade that smelled of expensive cologne and entitlement. Having second thoughts, darling? Rufus called. Out mockingly, smart girl. Cowboy's life is hard and dirty. I could give you silk dresses, a house in town, servants to wait on you hand and foot. Magnolia felt Corbin tense beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun at his hip. But she stepped forward before he could react, her chin lifting. With the fierce pride that had sustained her through her family's disgrace, I'd rather scrub floors in rags than wear silk bought with your father's blood money, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the empty street. At least Corbin McKenna earned his gold honestly. Rufus's face darkened, and he took a menacing step forward. You'll regret this, you little, the lady spoken, Corbin said quietly. But there was steel in his voice that made Rufus's hired men exchange nervous glances. Time for you to move along. For a moment, violence hung in the air like the scent of gunpowder. Then Sheriff Morrison appeared in the courthouse doorway, his weathered face stern as he surveyed the scene. Problem here, gentlemen? He asked, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. Rufus smoothed his hair back, forcing a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. No problem at all, Sheriff. Just wishing the happy couple well. But as he turned to leave, he leaned close enough to Magnolia that only she could hear his whispered words. This isn't over, sweetheart. Enjoy your cowboy while you can. The threat lingered in the air long after Rufus and his men disappeared into the shadows of Main Street. Magnolia shivered, and not entirely from the cool night breeze that rustled her torn skirts. Corbin noticed immediately, his protective instincts flaring. As he stepped closer to shield her from both the wind and any watching eyes. Come on, he said gently, offering her his arm. Let's get you somewhere warm and safe. But where? Ah! The question hung unspoken between them. The boarding house wouldn't take an unmarried woman traveling with a man, and the hotel was owned by Rufus's father. Magnolia's cheeks burned with shame at their predicament. She was legally bound to Corbin now, bought and paid for, yet still trapped by the suffocating social conventions that dictated every aspect of a woman's life. There's Widow Carmichael's place, Magnolia suggested hesitantly. She might let us stay the night if we explain the circumstances. Corbin nodded, though his jaw remained tight with concern. They walked in companionable silence through the muddy streets past the saloon, where raucous laughter spilled through the batwing doors. Past the general store, where tomorrow's gossips would dissect tonight's events with surgical precision. Widow, Carmichael answered her door in a faded housecoat, her gray hair pinned up in curling papers. But her weathered face softened when she saw Magnolia's condition and Corbin's respectful demeanor. Within minutes, she'd ushered them inside her modest parlor, clicking her tongue sympathetically as she bustled about preparing tea and sandwiches. That father of yours ought to be horsewhipped, the old woman muttered, wrapping a quilt around Magnolia's shoulders. Gambling away his own daughter like she was no more than a poker chip. It's done now, Magnolia said quietly, accepting the steaming cup of chamomile tea gratefully. I just need to figure out what comes next. What comes next is up to you, Corbin said firmly, settling into the chair across from her. In the lamplight, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the toll that his desperate ride through the storm had taken, yet his eyes remained kind, patient, giving her space to process the enormity of their situation. You could stay here in Willow Creek, Widow Carmichael suggested, refilling their cups. I could use help with my sewing. Business? And there's a small room upstairs. No. Magnolia's voice was stronger than she'd expected. I can't stay here. Not with everyone knowing. It's not with Rufus Blackthorne making threats. Corbin leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. I've got a ranch up in Montana territory. Nothing fancy, but it's good land, clean water, and, far enough from civilization that a person can start over without their past following them. Montana, Magnolia repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. She'd never been more than 20 miles from Willacrea in her entire life. It's wild country, Corbin continued, his voice taking on a warmth that spoke of deep love for the land, harsh winters. But summer is so beautiful, they take your breath away. Mountains that touch the sky, prairies that stretch farther than you can imagine. Despite everything, Magnolia found herself leaning forward, caught up in his description. And you'd want me there? Even though I come with nothing but scandal and debt? Especially because of that, he said with a slight smile. Montana doesn't care about Eastern social graces or family reputations. It judges people by their character, their willingness to work hard and stand by their neighbors. Widow Carmichael nodded approvingly. Sounds like exactly what you need, dear. A fresh start, where nobody knows your story except what you choose to tell them. A fresh start. The words echoed in Magnolia's mind like a prayer. No more whispered gossip, no more pitying looks, no more Rufus Blackthorne and his entitled assumptions about what he could take from her. How soon could we leave? She asked, surprising herself with her decisiveness. Corbin's face lit up with something that looked like hope. The morning train heads west at 8 o'clock. You could be in Denver by tomorrow night, then catch the stage north to Montana. The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. I mean, as what exactly? Would we be to each other? The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and uncertainty. Finally, Corbin reached across the small space, separating their chairs, and took her hand in his work-roughened palm. Whatever you want us to be, Magnolia. Partners, friends, or... He paused, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. Someday, maybe something more. But only when you're ready. Only if you want it to. Dawn crept across the horizon like spilled honey, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Magnolia stood at the window of Widow Carmichael's spare room, watching the sun burn away the last traces of the storm that had brought Corbin McKenna thundering back into her life. Her few possessions, a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, an oppressed wildflower Corbin had given her years ago. Packed in a small carpet bag beside the door, the train whistle echoed across the valley, announcing the 8 o'clock departure. In less than an hour, she would leave everything she'd ever known behind, venturing into the unknown with a man who'd proven his devotion in the most dramatic fashion possible, yet remained largely a mystery to her adult heart. A soft knock interrupted. Her thoughts? Magnolia? It's time. Corbin's voice carried through the thin wooden door, gentle but urgent. She smoothed her only clean dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, and picked up her bag. When she opened the door, she found Corbin waiting in the hallway, his own belongings slung over his shoulder in a worn leather saddlebag. He'd cleaned up as best he could, shaving away yesterday's stubble and combing back his dark hair. But nothing could hide the nervous energy that radiated from him like heat from a forge. You sure about this? He asked quietly, studying her face, with those steel-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Once we board that train, there's no turning back. Montana's a far piece from everything you know. There's nothing left for me here, she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Whatever waits for us out there has to be better than the whispers and shame I'd face every day in Willow Creek. They walked to the train station in comfortable silence, their footsteps echoing off the empty boardwalk. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist and revealing a town that looked smaller somehow in the clear light of day. The courthouse where her fate had been decided seemed less imposing, the streets narrower, as if her decision to leave had already begun to shrink Willow Creek's power over her. At the station, Corbin purchased 2 tickets to Denver, while Magnolia waited on a wooden bench, acutely aware of the curious stares from other passengers. A well-dressed couple whispered behind their gloved hands, clearly recognizing her from yesterday's spectacle. A traveling salesman leered openly until Corbin returned and positioned himself protectively beside her, his hand resting on the gun at his hip with casual menace. All set, Corbin said, handing her the ticket. Car 3, seats 12 and 13. The train pulled into the station with a great hissing of steam and grinding of brakes, its black engine looking like some mighty iron beast come to carry them away from their old lives. Passengers began boarding, and Magnolia felt her heart hammering against her ribs as the moment of departure approached. Magnolia. The voice that called her name was slurred with whiskey and thick with self-pity. She turned to see her father stumbling toward them across the platform, his clothes wrinkled and stained, his hair wild from a night spent drowning his sorrows at the saloon. "Papa," she whispered, her chest tightening with a complex mixture of love, disappointment, and anger. "Don't go," he pleaded, reaching for her with shaking hands. "I can fix this, sweetheart. I can win back the farm, make everything right again. Just give me another chance." Corbin stepped slightly forward, not threatening, but making his presence known. "She's made her choice, Mr. Fairweather. Best to let her go." "You don't understand," her father continued desperately, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "She's all I have left. Mother's gone, the farm's gone, everything's gone, except my little girl." Magnolia felt tears stinging her own eyes, but she forced herself to stand firm. "I can't save you from yourself, Papa. I've tried for 3 years, and it's only gotten worse. You gambled me away like I was nothing more than a horse or a piece of land." "Board!" the conductor called. "Oh, all aboard for Denver." The final whistle shrieked across the platform, and passengers began hurrying toward the train cars. Magnolia kissed her father's forehead gently, tasting salt and regret. "Goodbye, Papa. I hope someday you'll forgive yourself, because I do forgive you." With that, she turned and walked toward the train, Corbin beside her, leaving her father weeping on the platform as the great iron wheels began to turn and carry them toward their uncertain future in the wild. Montana Territory, the train car swayed rhythmically as it carried them through the endless expanse of prairie grass and distant mountains. Magnolia pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape transform from the familiar rolling hills of home to the vast, untamed wilderness that would become her new world. Beside her, Corbin dozed fitfully in his seat, his strong profile softened in sleep, his hand still resting protectively near hers on the armrest between them. They'd been traveling for 3 days now, the awkwardness of their situation gradually giving way to tentative friendship. Corbin proved to be a gentle traveling companion, always ensuring she had enough to eat, offering his jacket when the nights grew cold, engaging her in quiet conversations about everything except the circumstances that had brought them together. He told her about his ranch, 2,000 acres of grazing land nestled in a valley between snow-capped peaks, a modest cabin he'd built with his own hands, cattle that roamed free under the endless sky. "It's not much to look at yet," he'd said with characteristic modesty, "but it has good bones. Room to grow, room to breathe." Now, as the train pulled into the dusty station at Elk Ridge, Montana, Magnolia felt her stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. This would be her home, these rugged mountains and endless prairies. These would be her neighbors, the rough-looking men and women who climbed aboard the train with mud on their boots and calluses on their hands. "Welcome to Montana Territory," Corbin said softly as they gathered their belongings. His eyes held a mixture of pride and nervousness as he watched her take in the raw, beautiful landscape stretching beyond the station platform. The town of Elk Ridge was nothing like Willow Creek, where her hometown had been defined by neat picket fences and manicured gardens. This place seemed to have grown organically from the earth itself. Buildings were constructed of rough-hewn timber and local stone, built for function rather than beauty, yet possessing a rugged charm that spoke of human determination in the face of an unforgiving wilderness. McKenna. From across the platform, and Magnolia turned to see a mountain of a man striding toward them. He had a thick red beard and arms like tree trunks, but his blue eyes were kind as they took in the scene. "Didn't expect you back so soon, partner? And with company, I see." "Magnolia, meet Jasper O'Sullivan," Corbin said, his face lighting up with genuine affection. "He owns the spread next to mine. Jasper, this is Miss Magnolia Fairweather. B.E. staying at the ranch for a while." Jasper's bushy eyebrows rose with interest, but he was too much of a gentleman to pry. Instead, he swept off his hat in an elaborate bow that would have been comical on a smaller man. "Miss Fairweather, it's an honor. Welcome to God's country." "Thank you," Magnolia replied, finding herself charmed despite her nervousness. "It's certainly ... impressive." "That's one word for it," Jasper laughed, his voice echoing off the mountain walls. "Wait till winter comes, then you'll find some other words that might not be suitable for mixed company." The three of them climbed into Jasper's wagon for the ride to Corbin's ranch, winding through valleys where wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant splashes of color. The air was thin and clean, carrying the scent of pine and snow melt from the peaks above. Despite her uncertainty about the future, Magnolia felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying for years. "There," Corbin said softly, pointing ahead as they crested a small rise. "Home." Magnolia followed his gaze and gasped. The cabin, nestled in a natural bowl between two hills, was larger than she'd expected. Built of golden logs with a stone chimney that spoke of cozy winter evenings. The garden patch showed the neat rows of someone who'd put thought and care into the planting. And beyond the house, cattle grazed in meadows that seemed to stretch toward infinity. But it was the view that truly took her breath away. Mountains rose on all sides like the walls of a cathedral, their peaks still crowned with snow, despite the late spring warmth. A creek bubbled along one edge of the property, its water so clear she could see the smooth stones on the bottom from where she sat in the wagon. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and meant it completely. Corbin's face broke into the first truly relaxed smile she'd seen from him since that desperate night in the courthouse. "Wait till you see it in the morning when the sun hits those peaks just right. Looks like the whole world's made of gold." They pulled up to the cabin. A figure emerged from the shadows of the front porch, a woman with silver-streaked hair braided down her back and the weathered face of someone who'd lived through countless frontier hardships. She wore men's trousers and boots, a practical choice that would have scandalized the ladies of Willow Creek, but seemed perfectly natural here. "About time you got back," the woman called, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Been keeping your supper warm for 3 days now." "Magnolia," Corbin said, climbing down from the wagon and offering her his hand. "Meet Ruth Clearwater. She runs the trading post in town, but more importantly, she's the best cook in 3 counties and the closest thing to a mother I've had since my own past." Ruth stepped forward, her dark eyes assessing but not unkind as they took in Magnolia's travel-worn appearance. "So you're the girl he rode through hell and high water to save. Well, child, you're safe now. Montana's got a way of healing what? Civilization breaks." 3 months later, Magnolia stood in the garden behind Corbin's cabin, her hands dark with rich Montana soil as she harvested the last of the summer vegetables. The woman who had arrived on that train, scared, broken, carrying nothing but shame and a small carpet bag, seemed like a stranger now. The mountain air had brought color to her cheeks, and the honest work of frontier life had strengthened her body and spirit in ways she'd never imagined possible. She wore Ruth's cast-off trousers and one of Corbin's shirts, practical clothing. That would have horrified her former neighbors, but felt like freedom itself. Her hair was braided simply down her back, and her hands bore the honorable calluses of someone who contributed to the work that kept a ranch running. "The tomatoes came in better than I expected," she called to Corbin, who was mending fence near the creek. He looked up at the sound of her voice, and that familiar smile that still made her heart skip spread across his weathered features. "Your green thumbs made all the difference," he replied, setting down his tools and walking toward her. Over the months, they'd fallen into an easy partnership. He handled the cattle and heavy labor, while she managed the garden, the cooking, and the countless small tasks that transformed a bachelor's rough cabin into something that felt like home. They'd maintained separate sleeping quarters, of course. Corbin had insisted on that from the first night, giving up his own bed to sleep on a pallet by the fire. Their relationship had deepened into something precious and rare, a friendship built on mutual respect, shared work, and the kind of quiet understanding that came from weathering hardships together. But lately, Magnolia had caught herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking, admiring the strength in his hands as he worked, the gentle way he spoke to the animals, the protective instinct that flared whenever strangers came to the ranch.
Oh.
She'd begun to wonder what it would be like to truly belong here, not just as a refugee from her old life, but as a partner in building something new. Magnolia. His voice was unusually serious as he approached, his hat in his hands. "I need to tell you something." Her heart clenched with sudden fear. "What is it?" "Something Wrong? Not wrong, exactly. But Ruth heard news in town today. He paused, studying her face carefully. Rufus Blackthorn's been asking around, trying to find out where we went. Seems he's not willing to let things lie. The tomato she'd been holding fell from her numb fingers, splattering against the dark earth. He's coming here. I don't know. But if he is, I want you to know that you're safe. I won't let him hurt you, and neither will anyone else in this valley. You're part of this community now, Magnolia. People here care about you. She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself as old fears threatened to overwhelm the peace she'd found in this mountain sanctuary. Maybe I should go. Head further west, where he'll never think to look. No. Corbin's voice was firm, and when she looked back at him, his gray eyes burned with determination. Running won't solve anything besides... ... He stepped closer, his calloused hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. I can't let you go. Not now. Not ever. Corbin, she whispered, her name on his lips sounding like a prayer. I know we agreed to take things slow, to let you heal from everything you'd been through. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just friendship or duty. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone and she leaned into his touch. Despite herself, I love you, Magnolia, Fairweather. I love your courage, your strength, the way you've bloomed in this wild country like a flower finding sun after a long winter. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I love you too, she confessed, the words tumbling out like water breaking through a dam. I've loved you since we were children, and I love you even more now, seeing the man you've become. Their lips met in a kiss that was nothing like that desperate embrace in the courthouse. This kiss was tender, reverent, full of promise and hope for the future they would build together in this beautiful, forgiving land. When they finally broke apart, Corbin rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. Me, he said simply. Not because you were bought and paid for, not because you need protection, but because I can't imagine living the rest of my life without you by my side. Yes, she whispered, and then louder, with all the joy and certainty in her heart. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. As the sun set behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they held each other close and planned their future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whether Rufus Blackthorn or the harsh Montana winter, or the countless trials that came with carving a life from the wilderness, they would face them together. The cowboy who had ridden through the storm to save her had found his heart's desire, and the woman who had kissed him as the gavel fell had discovered that sometimes love could indeed conquer all. In the wild, beautiful land of Montana Territory, they would write their own story, one of courage, redemption, and the kind of love that could weather any storm.